Have you ever wondered why some of the kindest people suddenly become emotionally unreachable? Why someone who once gave endless love can wake up one day and feel absolutely nothing? Most people think an empath breaks because they're weak. Psychology says something very different. An empath doesn't collapse after one betrayal. They transform after hundreds. Every ignored boundary, every broken promise, every manipulation, every moment they were told they were too sensitive. Their brain begins changing in ways most people never notice. And here's the frightening part. The very traits that once made them loving, compassionate, and emotionally available begin shutting down, not because they stop caring, but because their nervous system decides survival is more important than connection. Today we're going inside the empath's brain to uncover what repeated emotional pain actually does. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the most caring people often become the coldest and why that transformation is one of psychology's most misunderstood survival mechanisms. Let's begin. The first thing repeated emotional pain attacks is the empath's nervous system. Most people imagine emotions happen only in the mind. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that your heart no longer reacts the way it once did. The laughter that used to fill your soul feels distant. A simple text message makes your chest tighten. A familiar voice triggers anxiety instead of comfort. You tell yourself you're being dramatic, but deep inside, something has changed. The terrifying truth is that it has, and science says that change isn't just emotional, it's biological. Most people believe emotional pain lives only in the mind. Modern neuroscience paints a much darker picture. Repeated emotional hurt can influence the brain and body in measurable ways, activating many of the same stress systems involved in physical danger. While emotional pain isn't identical to physical injury, the brain often processes social, rejection, and chronic emotional stress using overlapping neural networks. That's why heartbreak doesn't simply feel painful. To your brain, it can register as a genuine threat. Now imagine experiencing that threat not once, but hundreds of times. Every broken promise, every betrayal. Every moment you were told you were too sensitive, every time your kindness was exploited, every silent treatment, every manipulation disguised as love. Each experience becomes another lesson for the brain. Not a lesson about happiness, but a lesson about survival. Deep inside your skull sits a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Think of it as your internal alarm system. Its job is simple: detect danger and prepare you to survive. Under normal circumstances, it protects you from genuine threats. But repeated emotional wounds can make this alarm system more reactive. Instead of waiting for real danger, it begins anticipating it. Suddenly, a delayed reply feels like rejection. A change in someone's tone feels like abandonment. A disappointed facial expression feels like the beginning of another emotional disaster. Nothing dangerous may actually be happening, but your brain has learned one devastating rule. Stay alert. Pain always comes next. This is not weakness. This is conditioning. Researchers studying chronic stress have found that prolonged activation of the body's stress response can influence attention, memory, sleep, and emotional regulation. Stress hormones such as cortisol are essential in short bursts, but when the body remains under stress for long periods, they can contribute to fatigue, impaired concentration, and increased emotional sensitivity. The body was designed to survive emergencies, not to live inside one. An empath often feels the emotional atmosphere of a room before anyone speaks. They notice tiny pauses, forced smiles, artificial laughter, eyes that avoid contact, voices that sound different by only a fraction. These observations aren't magic. They're the result of exceptional attention to emotional cues. But when those cues have repeatedly predicted pain, the brain starts connecting ordinary social signals with emotional danger. This is where survival quietly replaces peace. Imagine carrying an invisible smoke detector inside your mind. At first, it activates only during real emergencies. Then repeated emotional injuries make it increasingly sensitive. Eventually, burnt toast triggers the same alarm as a house fire. That's what repeated emotional hurt can feel like. Your nervous system stops distinguishing between possibility and certainty. It prepares for disaster before disaster even exists. The tragedy is that most people watching this happen from the outside never understand it. They say, "You've changed. You overthink everything. You're too emotional. What they don't discern is the invisible battle happening inside your nervous system every second of the day. Your heart beats faster, your muscles tighten, your breathing becomes shallower, your mind begins scanning for clues. Not because you enjoy worrying, because your brain believes worrying might keep you alive emotionally. Psychologists often describe this as hypervigilance. It's the state of constantly searching your environment for potential threats. Originally, this response evolved to protect humans from predators. Today, it may become activated by repeated emotional stress instead of physical danger. The predator is no longer hiding in the forest. It's hiding inside uncertainty, inside mixed signals, inside manipulation, inside unpredictable relationships. The frightening part is that hypervigilance is exhausting. Your brain consumes enormous amounts of energy analyzing conversations, replaying arguments, predicting outcomes, searching for hidden meanings. You aren't simply having relationships anymore. You're conducting investigations. Every conversation becomes evidence. Every silence becomes a clue. Every smile becomes a question. And eventually, your body begins paying the price. Sleep becomes lighter. Relaxation feels unfamiliar. Moments of peace become interrupted by thoughts asking, what if it happens again? Scientists have shown that chronic stress can disrupt healthy sleep patterns, increase fatigue, and make emotional recovery more difficult. When restorative sleep suffers, the brain has a harder time regulating emotions the next day, creating a cycle that can feel impossible to escape. Then something even more remarkable happens. Your brain begins predicting pain before it arrives. This process is part of how the brain constantly forecasts what is likely to happen next based on previous experience. If 10 relationships ended in betrayal, the 11th relationship doesn't begin with hope. It begins with caution. If every act of vulnerability resulted in disappointment, your brain starts interpreting vulnerability itself as dangerous. This isn't negativity. It's adaptation. Your subconscious isn't trying to ruin your future. It's trying to prevent your past from repeating itself. And here's where the story becomes heartbreaking. The very qualities that once made the empath extraordinary begin working against them. Their compassion notices every emotional shift. Their imagination fills in missing information. Their memory recalls every previous wound. Together, these strengths can become overwhelming under repeated stress. Kindness turns into emotional exhaustion. Patience turns into self-sacrifice. Understanding turns into overanalysis. Eventually, the empath reaches a point where they no longer trust calm. Silence feels suspicious. Happiness feels temporary. Love feels unsafe. Not because those things truly are dangerous, but because their nervous system has learned to expect loss after every moment of peace. Yet there is something profoundly hopeful hidden inside all of this. The human brain is not fixed. It is capable of change throughout life. Just as repeated emotional pain can shape the nervous system, repeated experiences of genuine safety, healthy relationships, consistent respect, and secure boundaries can help reshape it over time. Healing does not erase the past. It teaches the brain a new pattern, one where kindness is not always followed by betrayal, one where vulnerability is met with respect instead of exploitation, one where love does not require constant fear. This process takes patience. It takes repetition. It takes evidence. The brain does not heal because someone says, "Trust me." It heals because, over time, experience repeatedly demonstrates that safety is possible. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. If repeated pain was powerful enough to convince your brain that the world was dangerous, repeated safety can gradually remind it that the world also contains people who will not weaponize your heart. So if you've been wondering why you feel constantly alert, why your chest tightens over small things, why your mind never seems to stop preparing for the next disappointment, know this. Your brain is not trying to punish you. It is trying to protect you with the only blueprint it has been given. The real journey begins when you slowly teach it a new blueprint, one built not on fear, but on evidence that peace, respect, and emotional safety are possible again. Because the strongest empath isn't the one who never feels pain. It's the one whose nervous system learns that survival is no longer the only way to live. There comes a moment in the life of many empaths that shocks everyone around them. The person who once forgave everything suddenly says, no. The one who answered every late-night phone call stops picking up. The one who carried everyone's emotional burdens quietly walks away without explaining. Friends call them cold. Family says they've changed. People who once depended on their endless compassion accuse them of becoming selfish. But what if the truth is exactly the opposite? What if this isn't the death of empathy, but the birth of emotional survival? Psychology suggests that when a person experiences repeated emotional hurt, the mind and body don't simply continue absorbing pain forever. Human beings have protective mechanisms designed to reduce overwhelming distress. These responses are not signs of failure. They are signs that the nervous system is trying to preserve itself after prolonged emotional strain. Think about a soldier returning from years of combat. Think about a person surviving a natural disaster. Think about someone who has lived through years of emotional manipulation. Although every experience is different, the brain responds to chronic stress by adapting. It becomes more focused on protection than openness. Its priority shifts from connection to survival. This adaptation is not always visible. It happens quietly, deep beneath awareness. One painful experience alone rarely changes a person's entire personality, but hundreds of painful experiences can slowly reshape how the brain responds to relationships. At first, the empath cries. Then they explain. Then they forgive. Then they hope. Then they wait. Then they try harder. Then they blame themselves. Eventually, something inside them becomes silent. Many people mistake this silence for emotional emptiness. Science offers another explanation. When emotional stress becomes overwhelming for extended periods, the nervous system may reduce emotional responsiveness as a protective response. Some people describe this as emotional numbness, a state where feelings seem muted or distant. It does not mean the person has lost the capacity to care. It may simply mean their mind is conserving emotional energy after carrying more than it could be safely sustain. Imagine touching a hot stove once. You pull your hand away immediately. Now imagine someone forcing your hand onto that stove every single day. Eventually, your first instinct would no longer be curiosity. It would be protection. Relationships work much the same way. If love repeatedly leads to betrayal, if honesty repeatedly leads to punishment, if vulnerability repeatedly leads to humiliation, the brain begins associating openness with danger, and danger demands defense. This is why an empath who once cried during every emotional conversation may suddenly sit in complete silence. Not because they don't feel, because feeling everything became too expensive. Every tear cost energy. Every argument cost sleep. Every betrayal cost trust. Eventually, the nervous system reaches a limit. The brain quietly whispers, "No more." One of the most misunderstood changes is emotional detachment. People often assume detached individuals no longer care. In reality, emotional detachment can be the mind's attempt to create enough distance to prevent further harm. Instead of experiencing every emotion at full intensity, the person may unconsciously reduce their emotional involvement to make daily life manageable again. This explains why an empath can appear calm during situations that once devastated them. Inside, the emotional system is conserving resources. It is choosing stability over constant overwhelm. And then another remarkable transformation begins: boundaries. Perhaps no word creates more confusion in unhealthy relationships. For years, the empath believed love meant unlimited access, unlimited patience, unlimited forgiveness, unlimited understanding. But repeated emotional injury teaches a devastating lesson. Unlimited access often invites unlimited exploitation. The brain never forgets patterns. Each ignored boundary becomes another memory stored as evidence. Evidence that saying yes every time did not create peace. It created exhaustion. Psychological research has long shown that chronic interpersonal stress can contribute to burnout, emotional fatigue, and reduced well-being. Healthy boundaries are associated with better emotional regulation, healthier relationships, and lower levels of chronic stress. Boundaries are not walls that shut everyone out. They are guidelines that help determine what behavior is acceptable. Eventually, the empath begins saying something they once feared. No. One simple word. Yet for someone conditioned to please everyone else, it feels revolutionary. The first time they say it, their heart races. Their hands shake. Their mind fills with guilt. What if they leave? What if they get angry? What if they stop loving me? These fears don't appear by accident. They are echoes of previous experiences where asserting personal needs resulted in criticism, rejection, or manipulation. But something extraordinary happens each time the empath keeps that boundary. The nervous system learns a new lesson. I survived. That lesson is powerful. It rewrites old expectations. It teaches the brain that self-protection does not automatically lead to catastrophe. Ironically, the people who benefited most from the empath's lack of boundaries often react the strongest. They complain, they criticize, they guilt-trip, they accuse the empath of changing, and they're right. The empath has changed, not into someone cruel, into someone aware. Aware that compassion without limits can become self-destruction. Aware that understanding someone's pain does not require tolerating harmful behavior. Aware that forgiveness does not erase accountability. One of the greatest myths in modern relationships is that kindness requires self-sacrifice. Healthy psychology says otherwise. Real compassion includes yourself. Ignoring your own emotional needs while constantly rescuing others eventually creates resentment, exhaustion, and emotional depletion. An empty cup cannot continue pouring forever. Repeated emotional pain eventually teaches what endless giving never could. Your peace has value. Your energy has limits. Your nervous system deserves protection. This is not selfishness. It is biology. The body cannot remain in survival mode indefinitely without consequences. Chronic stress affects sleep, concentration, mood, energy, decision-making, even physical health. Protecting your emotional well-being supports your overall health because the mind and body are deeply connected. And then, one day, the empath notices something remarkable. Silence no longer feels lonely. Solitude becomes peaceful. Approval becomes unnecessary. Chaos loses its attraction. They stop chasing people who repeatedly choose misunderstanding over communication. They stop explaining boundaries to those committed to crossing them. They stop apologizing for protecting their own heart. This transformation often confuses the outside world. People expected unlimited access. Instead, they meet calm confidence. They expected emotional availability on demand. Instead, they encounter thoughtful distance. The empath hasn't become colder. They've become wiser. They've learned that not every battle deserves their energy. Not every accusation deserves a response. Not every relationship deserves unlimited chances. The most healed empath is not the one who trusts everyone, nor the one who trusts no one. It is the one who allows trust to grow through consistency rather than promises, through actions rather than words, through respect rather than pressure. This is emotional maturity. And perhaps the greatest surprise of all, the empath who once feared boundaries eventually discovers that healthy people rarely object to them. People who genuinely care about you don't demand unlimited access to your time, emotions, or identity. They respect your limits because they value your well-being. Those who become angry every time you protect yourself often reveal more about their expectations than about your character. So, if you've noticed yourself becoming quieter, more selective, more protective of your peace, don't assume you've lost your empathy. Ask a different question. Have you finally stopped abandoning yourself? Because sometimes the most compassionate thing an empath can do is not giving another chance. Sometimes it's choosing rest over rescue, peace over pleasing, boundaries over burnout. And in that quiet decision, something extraordinary happens. You don't become less loving. You become someone whose love is finally guided by wisdom instead of fear. That is not the end of empathy. It is the beginning of a healthier life, where kindness no longer comes at the cost of your own heart, and where protecting yourself becomes the very thing that allows your compassion to survive. There is a moment in every wounded empath's life that feels almost impossible to explain. Nothing dramatic happens, no final argument, no explosive betrayal, no grand realization. Instead, one quiet morning, they look at the world through different eyes. The pain is still there, the memories remain, but something inside has changed. For the first time, they stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" And they begin asking a far more powerful question. What is this experience trying to teach me? That single shift changes everything. Because healing is not the process of becoming the person you were before you were hurt. The version of you that existed before the pain was often innocent, trusting, and endlessly available, but sometimes without the boundaries needed to stay emotionally healthy. Healing is about becoming someone wiser, someone who keeps their compassion without surrendering their peace, someone who can love deeply without disappearing inside someone else's emotional chaos. Many people believe healing means forgetting. Psychology suggests something very different. Healthy recovery is not the erasure of painful memories. Instead, it is the brain gradually learning that those memories no longer have to control every present moment. The past remains part of your story, but it does not have to dictate every prediction about the future. The human brain possesses an extraordinary ability called neuroplasticity. This means the brain is capable of changing throughout life. Every experience, every habit, every relationship, every thought repeatedly practiced can strengthen or weaken neural pathways. Repeated emotional pain can shape the brain toward fear. Repeated emotional safety can help shape it toward trust. This is one of the most hopeful discoveries in modern neuroscience. Your brain is not a prison. It is adaptable. It learns from repetition. If years of manipulation taught your nervous system that people were dangerous, years of healthy relationships can gradually teach it that safety exists too. But healing demands something incredibly difficult. Patience. The wounded empath often wants immediate relief. They want one conversation to erase 10 years of heartbreak, one apology to repair a shattered sense of trust, one act of kindness to silence a lifetime of self-doubt. The brain rarely works that way. It changes through repeated evidence. Imagine walking through a forest. The path you've traveled every day for years becomes easy to follow. Now imagine choosing an entirely different direction. At first, there is no trail, only resistance, branches, uncertainty. But every time you walk that new path, it becomes a little clearer. Eventually it becomes the road your brain naturally follows. Healing works the same way. Every healthy decision strengthens a different pathway. Every respected boundary, every honest conversation, every peaceful relationship, every moment of self-compassion. These experiences become evidence that the world is larger than your past. One of the greatest transformations occurs in the empath's ability to recognize patterns. Before healing, they noticed emotional shifts, but often ignored what those shifts meant. They explained away red flags. They minimized disrespect. They confused inconsistency with complexity. They believed love required endless patience. After healing, observation becomes wisdom. The same sensitivity remains, but now it serves protection instead of self-sacrifice. The empath notices manipulation sooner, not because they have become cynical, because experience has sharpened their awareness. Psychologists often describe this as learning from experience rather than remaining trapped by it. The goal is not to expect the worst from everyone. The goal is to recognize unhealthy patterns before they become repeated cycles. That distinction changes lives. Then comes another extraordinary discovery. Healing teaches the empath the difference between empathy and responsibility. For years, those two ideas felt identical. If someone was hurting, the empath believed it was their job to fix it. If someone was angry, they assumed they had caused it. If someone struggled, they carried that burden as if it belonged to them. But emotional maturity introduces a revolutionary truth. Understanding another person's pain does not make you responsible for solving it. Compassion can exist without self-abandonment. You can care deeply without carrying everything. This realization often feels uncomfortable at first. Guilt appears. Fear appears. Old habits beg to return. But over time, something remarkable happens. The empath discovers that protecting their own peace actually allows them to care more authentically. Instead of rescuing everyone, they begin supporting people who genuinely want to grow. Instead of fixing, they begin encouraging. Instead of absorbing, they begin listening. This shift protects both the empath and the people around them. Another profound change happens inside the nervous system. The body slowly learns what safety feels like again. Not perfect safety, realistic safety. Healthy relationships become predictable. Promises are kept. Boundaries are respected. Communication becomes honest instead of confusing. These repeated experiences gradually reduce the constant state of alert that once dominated daily life. The heart beats more calmly. Sleep becomes deeper. Breathing slows. The mind no longer searches every conversation for hidden danger. This process doesn't happen overnight, but it happens. Science has shown that supportive relationships, effective stress management, quality sleep, regular physical activity, and evidence-based therapies can all contribute to healthier emotional regulation and improved resilience over time. Healing is rarely the result of one dramatic breakthrough. More often, it is built through many small, consistent experiences that teach the brain it no longer has to remain in survival mode. Perhaps the greatest gift healing offers is discernment. Discernment is not suspicion, it is clarity. It allows the empath to ask important questions. Does this person's behavior consistently match their words? Do I feel emotionally safe around them? Can I express my needs without fear? Am I becoming more peaceful or more anxious? These questions become a compass. Instead of chasing intense emotional chemistry, the healed empath begins choosing emotional consistency, because they finally understand something many people never learn. Chaos feels exciting. Peace feels secure. Only one of them builds lasting relationships. Another beautiful transformation quietly unfolds. The empath stops trying to convince everyone to understand them. For years, they over-explained, over-apologized, over-gave. They believed that if they just found the perfect words, everyone would finally see their heart. Healing changes that belief. They realize that people committed to misunderstanding you rarely need more information. They need a different intention. An intention cannot be argued into existence. This realization saves enormous emotional energy, energy that can now be invested somewhere else, into meaningful friendships, into purpose, into family, into creativity, into health, into themselves. Slowly, the empath begins rediscovering joy, not the fragile joy that depends on everyone else's approval, but a quieter joy, one rooted in authenticity. They laugh without guilt, rest without apology, say no without panic, leave unhealthy situations without endless explanations, celebrate their own growth without waiting for permission. The outside world often calls this confidence. Inside, it feels like freedom. Freedom from constant emotional survival. Freedom from believing every relationship must be earned through sacrifice. Freedom from carrying emotions that never belong to them. And perhaps the most powerful realization arrives last. The empath understands that kindness without wisdom becomes vulnerability to exploitation. But kindness guided by discernment becomes one of the greatest strengths a human being can show. They no longer close their heart to the world. They simply become intentional about who has access to it. Because access is earned, not assumed. Trust is built, not demanded. Love grows through consistency, not intensity. If you're watching this and wondering whether your sensitivity has become a curse, remember this. Sensitivity was never the problem. The absence of emotional safety was. Your ability to feel deeply is not a weakness, Winnemone. It is a strength to protect, and protection does not diminish compassion. It preserves it. So the next time someone tells you that you've changed, smile quietly, because they're right. You have changed. You no longer confuse self-sacrifice with love. You no longer measure your worth by how much pain you can endure. You no longer believe that being needed is the same as being valued. You have learned that true empathy begins with extending the same care, patience, and respect to yourself that you once reserved only for everyone else. That is the real transformation. Not becoming colder, not becoming harder, but becoming wiser. A wiser empath still feels deeply, still loves fully, still believes in human goodness. The difference is that now, their compassion walks hand in hand with boundaries, discernment, and self-respect. And that is where true healing begins, not when the pain disappears, but when it no longer has the power to define who you are.